Route 66 has always been synonymous with adventure for Sarah Williams. At the age of 12, she saw that deserted road as an extension of her freedom. Cycling along its winding curves and vast expanses was her favorite routine, something she did without fear, even knowing the stories that the locals told. For the older ones, the road was more than a place, it was a warning. For years, reports of unexplained disappearances haunted those who passed by there, but Sarah, with her childlike innocence, ignored the warnings. Until one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. It was a sunny Thursday when Sarah left home on her bike. "Don't be long in coming back," her mother shouted as she disappeared over the horizon. But Sarah didn't return. Hours passed, and when the sun set, the family began to worry. Her father went out in the car to look for her, going around every curve of that winding road, calling her name at the top of his lungs. There was no sign of her, only the wind cutting through the silence of the night. The next morning, the bicycle was found abandoned on the side of the road, next to a large tree that seemed to be watching over the place. The ground around it was covered in dry leaves, but something caught the attention of the police who were called to the scene. Written on the ground in white chalk was a phrase that sent chills down the spines of even the most skeptical. "He's here." There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just that ominous warning. The following days were a whirlwind of searching and desperation. Helicopters flew over the area, rescue teams searched every patch of forest around the road, and posters with Sarah's face were posted in neighboring towns. But it all seemed in vain. There were no clues, no answers. What was left was an overwhelming emptiness, a sense of loss that the family could not accept. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate through the community. Some said that Sarah had been taken by a mysterious driver who had been passing by that road that day. Others spoke of something darker, a presence that many swore they felt when passing by that stretch at night. Some of the older residents said that this particular tree marked the spot where something terrible had happened in the past. But, as with all legends, no one had any proof. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Sarah's mother did not give up, keeping a candle lit in the window every night, as if she were waiting for her daughter to come home. But in the heart of the community, hope was beginning to wane. Route 66 had swallowed up yet another victim, and the mystery of Sarah Williams' disappearance became yet another echo in that forgotten region. Time passed, but the enigma remained. And like so many others who disappeared on that road, Sarah seemed destined to be just another name lost in the archives of the unexplained. 3 years have passed since Sarah Williams disappeared. Highway 66 remained as it always had been, empty, desolate, and shrouded in an unsettling silence. Sarah's family went about their daily routine, but the pain never left her parents' faces. They had learned to live with her absence, but they never accepted her loss. It was on a cold November night that everything changed. A truck driver named Thomas Harper was traveling along that same stretch of road on a moonless dawn. The monotonous sound of tires on asphalt and the whistling of the wind were his companions until, in the corner of his headlights, he spotted something. A small, barefoot figure was walking slowly along the shoulder of the road. Thomas stopped abruptly, the brakes screeching loudly in the silence of the night. Leaving the cab, he approached her cautiously. It was a girl, dirty, disoriented, and clearly scared. When she looked up, he recognized her face immediately. Sarah Williams. The news of Sarah's return spread through the city like wildfire. The community, which had long since accepted her disappearance as definitive, was now in an uproar. Sarah's parents rushed to the hospital to find her. She was physically intact, but something about her had changed. Her eyes, once lively and full of curiosity, now seemed glassy, as if she were staring at something far away. Sarah didn't speak much, only mumbling incoherent words that doctors attributed to severe trauma. During the first few days in the hospital, Sarah couldn't explain where she had been. She claimed not to remember anything, but in the early hours of the morning, nurses reported that she would often mumble in her sleep. Words like door, darkness, and him were the most frequent. Her mother, determined to understand what had happened, asked a child psychologist to try to help Sarah recover her memories. In the first few sessions, Sarah barely spoke. She stared at the floor, avoiding the therapist's gaze. But little by little, fragments of memories began to emerge. She mentioned a dark, cold place where time seemed to stand still. She spoke of a tall figure, whom she could never fully see but who was always there, silently watching her. Her therapist believed that these details could be a symbolic manifestation of the trauma, but Sarah's parents were not convinced. They wanted concrete answers, something that could explain how their daughter had disappeared for 3 years and yet returned without aging a day. Meanwhile, the community speculated. Some people believed that Sarah had been kidnapped and held captive. Others were convinced that something supernatural was behind it all. The older ones, those who knew the legends of Route 66, said that Sarah had crossed over to another world and that her return was only temporary. Sarah still had no answers, but one thing was clear: she was not free. At night, she would wake up screaming, saying that he was still there, watching her. Her parents tried to comfort her, but the fear in her eyes was contagious. The feeling that something more was coming hung over everyone like a storm about to break. Weeks passed, and Sarah's memories began to emerge like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. It was in her therapist's office that she showed the first signs of progress, but what emerged brought no relief, only more questions and a latent fear that seemed to consume her. During sessions, Sarah described sensations, not events. She spoke of intense cold, of darkness so thick it seemed to have weight, and of a constant presence. It was always there, but it never moved. The therapist tried to guide her, asking careful questions so as not to re-traumatize her. "Where were you, Sarah? Was it a room? A house?" But the answer always came with the same confused tone. "It wasn't a place. It was like I was in between things." These words intrigued the therapist but terrified her parents. The descriptions made no sense, but the precision with which Sarah spoke made it seem all too real. Over time, the fragments took shape. Sarah remembered a door, always the same door. She said that at first the door was far away, almost like a dot on the horizon. "I tried to reach it, but the further I walked, the further it got. It was like I was trapped in a place that didn't want me to leave." When asked what was beyond the door, she would shake and refuse to answer. Sarah's dreams became a window into the horrors she experienced. At night, she would scream in her sleep, waking the entire house. Sometimes her parents would find her sitting up in bed, mumbling nonsense. On one such night, her mother heard her say, "He said I was his, that I would never leave again." When confronted about the dream in the morning, Sarah denied remembering anything, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. In the 3rd week of therapy, Sarah finally spoke more about the figure that followed her. She didn't have a name for it, but she described it as something huge that filled the space around her. "He didn't have a face, but I knew he was watching me all the time. He didn't speak, but I could hear his voice in my head. It was like he was inside me." These words sent a chill down the spine of the therapist, who began to wonder whether Sarah was dealing with extreme trauma or something that defied comprehension. At the same time, the community was divided. Many said that Sarah had been the victim of a kidnapping and that her mind had created these memories as a way of coping. Others, especially the more superstitious, believed that Sarah had actually crossed over to another world, a world from which few people return. These rumors grew even more intense when other locals began reporting visions of a tall, shadowy figure by the side of the road. As Sarah tried to rebuild her life, her parents did everything they could to protect her. But with each new fragment of memory, it became clear that whatever had happened to her was not over. Sarah began to avoid mirrors, saying she could see something in there. During one session, she finally looked at the therapist and said something that froze the room. "He's still here. I can feel him." Sarah knew the door was the key to everything. In therapy sessions, she began to talk more about the object. She described how it always seemed to be there, at the edge of her vision, a rectangular shadow floating in the darkness. Despite its apparent simplicity, there was something unsettling about the door. Sarah said it felt alive, pulsing, emitting a low vibration that she heard in her bones, not in her ears. During one session, Sarah explained that she had tried to ignore it at first. For days, or maybe years, time had no meaning there. She had walked in the darkness, avoiding looking directly at the shape. but the door always seemed closer when she closed her eyes. It was like I was being pushed toward it, even without wanting to, like something wanted me to go through it. The therapist asked what was beyond the door. Sarah hesitated. Her face went pale and she clenched her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I saw it, but I can't describe it. It was like I was looking at everything and nothing at the same time. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. But I knew that if I went in, I would never come out. Sarah's parents were in the room during this revelation and felt the impact of her words. The idea that their daughter had experienced something so incomprehensible was both disturbing and despairing. The therapist tried to guide the conversation calmly, but the fear on Sarah's face grew. Then she revealed the turning point. On what seemed like the last day before her return, Sarah said she could no longer avoid the door. She was so close there was nowhere left to go. I felt like I was being pulled, like something behind me was pushing. When she finally put her hand on the door, she felt something cold and slimy, as if the surface were alive. That's when he appeared. She described the figure that haunted her. Tall, much taller than a normal human, with proportions that seemed wrong. He had no face, but I knew he was looking at me, and I could hear his voice, even though he didn't speak. The voice said only one thing: "You shouldn't be here." Sarah tried to back away, but her hands were pinned to the door as if they were part of it. And then, everything dissolved. The therapist asked her what she meant by dissolved. Sarah stammered, trying to find the words. The world disappeared. I saw things, people I knew, but they weren't them. Places that seemed real, but were wrong. It was like a puzzle put together with the wrong pieces. She paused, breathing hard. And then I saw myself. It was on the other side of the door, looking at me. The revelation left everyone in the room in absolute silence. Sarah's parents tried to comfort their daughter, but she was shaking, as if she still felt the cold of that place. The therapist, for the first time, didn't know how to proceed. Sarah's memories were not only fragmented, they were impossible. In the days that followed, Sarah became more introspective. She avoided talking about the door or what she saw, but the shadows under her eyes and the lost look in her eyes showed that the event still consumed her. The nightmares worsened, and she began to wake up screaming almost every night. When asked what she had dreamed, Sarah would repeat only one phrase: "He's still there, waiting." The family tried to return to normal, but there was no way to ignore the impact of Sarah's memories. More and more people in the community began reporting visions of a door appearing on Route 66, always accompanied by a tall, silent figure. For many, it was just mass hysteria. But for others, it was a warning that something was coming. Sarah's return changed the lives of everyone around her, but not in the way they had expected. Although she was physically present, she seemed trapped somewhere else, as if part of her soul had remained on the other side of the door. The community, initially united by the mystery of her disappearance, soon began to divide into debates, rumors, and theories. For some, Sarah was a miracle. For others, a reminder that things that should not be touched had been awakened. Sarah began to avoid mirrors and windows. Whenever she passed one, she would quickly look away or cover the glass with a cloth. When her mother pressed her to explain this behavior, Sarah finally blurted out, "I see him there. He won't go away. He always watches me from afar, but he never comes near." These words plunged her family into an atmosphere of constant terror. If they had previously believed that what Sarah had experienced was in her past, now they were no longer sure. The therapist tried to continue the sessions, but Sarah refused to talk about the door or what was beyond it. Instead, her accounts became more vague and unsettling. She spoke of whispers she heard in her head at night, a low humming that seemed to grow louder whenever she closed her eyes. Her parents put extra locks on the doors of the house and put bright lamps around them, trying to keep out whatever was causing their daughter's suffering. But Sarah knew it was no use. "You can't lock away what doesn't belong in this world," she said one night, staring out the covered window. The community soon noticed the Williams family's strange behavior. Some said they were being haunted by the shadowy figure others claimed to have seen. Rumors of sightings on Route 66 grew, and truck drivers began to avoid the stretch of road where Sarah had been found. The road, once deserted and dreary, became a symbol of fear for all who knew her. On the quietest nights, Sarah would wake up screaming, pointing to a dark corner of her room. When her parents rushed to comfort her, she would only whisper, "He's here." No figure was in sight, but the feeling that something was not right permeated the atmosphere. The family sought religious help, asking a local pastor to bless the house. For a brief period, the mood seemed to improve, but Sarah knew it was not enough. "You can't drive away what never left here," she repeated. As the months passed, Sarah became more reclusive. She would sit in the backyard for hours, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something. One day, when questioned by her mother, she said, "He's going to take me back. I know he will." Those words shattered the last of her family's hope. They decided it was time to leave the city, leave everything behind, and start over somewhere else. But Sarah refused to go. "There's no point in running away. He doesn't belong here, but he's everywhere." The night that everything changed was the quietest of all. The house was immersed in an eerie silence, as if the world had stopped. Sarah was last seen sitting on the porch, staring at the distant road. When her parents woke up the next morning, she was gone. Her bed was untouched and the front door was still locked from the inside. But in the backyard, there were marks on the ground, 2 parallel lines leading toward the road. Beside them, small bare footprints disappeared into the asphalt. Sarah was never seen again. The community to this day avoids Route 66. The more superstitious say she wasn't taken. She chose to return. Others believe she was just another victim of something much bigger than anyone can comprehend. But one thing is certain. In the dead of night, when the wind blows down the road, some say they can hear a soft, distant voice. It's just 2 words. He's come. Thank you for joining us on this chilling ride through the shadows of America's roads. If you crave more spine-tingling tales from the dark asphalt, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support keeps these haunting stories alive. Stay tuned, because on these roads, the next nightmare is always just a mile away. Welcome to Asphalt Horror.